Well, it is good to be here this morning. I appreciate so much this invitation to speak to you here at Hillside, to be a part of this gathering. For those that are not aware, this is my second time to be in Zimbabwe. Came last September, and it was much warmer then. It's been a little cold for my taste, but I'm so glad to be here. This today is a unique experience for me because up until this time, all my preaching in Zimbabwe has been in rural churches where I had to work with a translator, and this is the first time I've been in a city church. So also the first time I will be preaching. I've done some preacher classes in English, but first time to just be able to preach in English. But as I was thinking about it, I thought, with my American English, which has a southern dialect, y'all may still think you need a translator before it's over, but hopefully not too bad. The one thing I know is I've been told oftentimes I talk loud enough everybody can hear me. Hopefully you'll understand me. I want you to think about something as we begin. Every person on earth is a unique individual. No two people are exactly alike. Even if you have identical twins, they're different. If you were to look at me and Professor, you would obviously note that we are different. For example, he's a lot thinner than I am, and I've got more hair than he does. That's what you would notice, I'm sure. Really and truly, we all are different. People are different in their outward appearance. They're different in the fact that we have different abilities. Sometimes we live at different economic levels. There are just all kinds of things that make us different. And yet, God says He wants us to be one. 1 Corinthians 1, in verse 10, Paul begins to deal with a problem that really runs throughout the book of 1 Corinthians. This church had issues that were dividing it. Now I plead with you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. For it has been declared to me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Now I say this, that each of you says, I am of Paul, or I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas, or I am of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in the name of Paul? It's all about Jesus. And yet he said, you're lining up behind different people, calling yourself by your allegiance to other people. A congregation ought to be united. Look at the book of Ephesians in the 4th chapter. He says some very similar things here. Verse 1. I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you are called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Bond of peace. The unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. A church of our Lord Jesus Christ ought to be a united group of people. How does that happen? How can you take people from different backgrounds, from different tribes, from different races, from different economic levels, educational levels? How can you bring them together? Well, the next few verses tell us one thing. There needs to be a common standard. Now, I come over here and I have to get used to different standards. In America, we have Fahrenheit. You have Celsius temperatures over here. And they don't make good sense to me. I can't figure out what it is. I saw the price of gasoline or petrol. I'm like, wow, that's a great price. Then I have to remember, that's just for a liter. We charge by the gallon in America. These are different standards. But look at what he says. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling. one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's above all and through all and in you all. If we don't agree on the one God and the one Lord Jesus Christ, the one faith that Jude describes as having been once delivered for all of the saints, there's no way to be united. In 2 John, he speaks of the doctrine of Christ and how crucial it is that we all abide in that. Verse 9 says, whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house nor greet him. For he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. The reality is, God does not want me to be united with everyone. There are those who will not abide in the doctrine of Christ, who refuse to walk within the confines of Scripture. And he tells me that's the person I'm not to share with in my greeting and say, how are you, my brother? People have to be in the doctrine of Christ. That's crucial. We've got to get ourselves understanding this is the standard. This is the only thing we can follow. But let's just say, very plainly, sometimes people are committed to the word when it comes to the worship. They don't want you to teach false doctrine. But there are still problems. There are still conflicts and disagreements because we don't have the love that we should have for one another. 1 Peter 1 and verse 22. Peter says, you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren. Love one another fervently with a pure heart. Insincere love is given in some translations as for sincere love. And he uses the same Greek word that's used for the word for in Acts 2:38. It's a preposition of purpose. God cleansed us that we might love one another. And it's to be a fervent love. Look at John, the 13th chapter. Remember Jesus the night before his crucifixion? He gathers with the apostles and he does what might seem the unthinkable. God in the flesh washes the feet of his apostles, trying to teach them the beauty of serving others. And in verse 34, he says, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Our love for one another, it ought to be something that people see, that people recognize. And they say, the Hillside Church, the Ardmore Church where I live, the East Side Church in Russellville, Alabama, where Tad is. People always say, those are people who love one another. You can just tell they care about each other. We need love and unity. And I'd like to just talk with you a few moments about some practical ways that love demonstrates itself. I can say I love people, but if I don't put some action behind my words, they're meaningless. And I want to start with what we're doing right here this morning. Hebrews, the 10th chapter. It is just a wonderful, wonderful passage of Scripture. And I know they all are, but some just rise to greater heights, it seems. And starting with verse 19, He's used language that's borrowed from the Old Testament, where they had the tabernacle that most Israelites couldn't go inside. The high priest could only go into the holiest place once a year. But he tells us now, by the blood of Jesus, we can come to the very throne of God. We can enter through the veil that is his flesh. And this is primarily an action that is personal. But then he says, verse 24, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. What a thought. I can come before the throne of God. I can enter into the holiest place. And then he says, but I also ought to think about others. I ought to think about my need to stir them up, stir them to love and good works, to exhort them. I need to be together with others. In Colossians 3 and verse 16, when he speaks of us singing with grace in our hearts to the Lord, he also says teaching and admonishing one another. We need to appreciate that as we come together at any gathering of the church, it's an opportunity to worship the Almighty, to give unto God and to Jesus Christ the glory they deserve. But in a very real way, it's also a demonstration of love. And when I forsake the assembly, not only am I not honoring God, I'm really showing that I don't care as much about my brethren as I should. Because your presence is an encouragement. Your absence can be a discouragement. The most important reason may be to honor God. But sometimes maybe we don't feel our very best. And I'm not talking about something contagious, something I could spread to others, but I just don't feel that great. And I think, well, I think I'll just stay home today and read my Bible. I'll pray at home by myself. Think about others. Think of what they need and how they can be inspired by you when they see you. Back in Ardmore, Alabama, where I'm preaching, we have a 96-year-old woman who's a member of the church there. And she does not miss unless she is really sick. And she comes in that door and she's smiling and happy and joyous. And I tell you what, it's encouraging. That kind of thing makes you want to do better. Help one another. But look at 1 John, the 3rd chapter. We'll run a few things together here. In verse 16, the 3rd chapter, he says, by this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. There's our starting point. I grant you, I'm not the easiest to always love. Some of my brothers and sisters aren't always just super easy to love. But I look at Jesus, and every week I'm reminded that he laid down his life for me. He laid down his life for those that maybe I struggle to love. And that ought to motivate me. And then he says, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and truth. When he said, let us not love in word or in tongue, but this is one of those times when the scripture's not saying, don't do this at all. But don't stop there. A husband or wife, they ought to verbally tell their spouse, I love you. But if that's all they do is say it, the spouse soon figures that out. And they know there's no action behind it. It's good to tell our brothers and sisters, we love you. But if you see your brother in need, and you do nothing to help, he said, that's not really love. Sometimes I go through the book of Acts, and I read those first few chapters, and I think about people who didn't just dig deep into their pockets. Some of them sold lands and houses in order to meet the needs of their brothers and sisters. That's incredible. That really is amazing. Look at 1 Peter, the 4th chapter. Here he talks about love, and again he uses that word fervent love. A love that's real, that's burning. Have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. It really seems to me like that in the last 20 or 30 years or so of my life, hospitality is not as common among Christians as it once was. That the idea of having others into your home and entertaining them and being with them, it's just not as common as it used to be. And I know, at least in my country, people have more, they have better homes than they've ever had. In many ways, you think the opportunities are greater than they've ever been. And yet there seems to be less of it. And sometimes people say, in all honesty, I really can't afford to do much entertaining. Okay? The point of hospitality is not always just you've got to feed somebody, although that can help sometimes. But it can be simple. Just have somebody over for peanut butter and jam. Have them over for a cup of tea. The idea is to be together, to offer encouragement, to let people know you care about them. I want you to think about something in 1 Corinthians 5 that maybe gets overlooked sometimes. 1 Corinthians 5, of course, is where the man has taken his father's wife. And Paul said, you need to deal with this. That man needs to be put away from among you. Because a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And he goes on to tell them, starting in verse 9, not to keep company with people who are called your brothers, who are guilty of sexual immorality, covetousness, idolatry, reviling, drunkenness, extortion. And he says in verse 11, don't eat with such a person. I want you to think for just a second. He said, if you've got a brother, someone in the church that's sleeping with his father's wife, you do not keep company with him. You don't eat with him. Somebody that's a drunkard, these other things, you don't eat with them. What about those brothers who are not committing fornication, not being drunkards, and not being all these things? Isn't the implication that we would keep company with them? That we would eat with them? That we would have these associations that form bonds, that build that unity of the Spirit? In Matthew, the 10th chapter, in verse 42, Jesus said, and whoever gives one of these little ones only a cup of cold water in the name of a disciple, assuredly I say to you, he shall by no means lose his reward. In my 2 trips to Zimbabwe, I've spent a good bit of time out in some rural areas where people have very, very little. They have almost nothing in a material way to share with people. But one of the points I've tried to make with them is here Jesus said just a cup of cold water. it doesn't cost anything to speak words of kindness. In Ephesians 4:29, he warns us about using bad language. And then he says, speak words that bring edification to others, that build others up. Your pockets can be empty, and yet you can be kind to others. Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another. I mentioned a 96-year-old woman back in Arden. She's got very little in the way, things of this world. But she gives me something every time I see her. She gives me a smile. Sometimes she gives me a hug. Before I left, she hugged me and said she wanted me to hurry back. Well, I don't have any control over how fast the pilot flies, but, she gives something. Though she doesn't have a lot of this world to share. Never, ever use a lack of resources as an excuse for not giving something to your brothers and sisters. Even if it's just a smile, a pat on the back. Romans, the 12th chapter, verse 15. I like it sometimes when Paul gets into sections like this. A lot of times the Apostle Paul, if you've studied his letters, and I'm sure all of you have, he can get into some long, involved arguments. And sometimes it's almost as if, in America we call it chasing rabbits. He'll start to make a point, and then boom, it seems like he jumps over to something else. He goes with that a little while, then he comes back to his main point. Those are very valuable. But then sometimes you get to a passage like Romans 12, starting in verse 9, and he's just firing off one instruction after another. And love is a general theme of this. But in verse 15 he says, rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Let me take the second one first. When your brothers and sisters are hurting, be there for them. Support them. Don't be too busy to drop by their house. Go and visit. Do whatever is needed. Maybe it's cook some food and take to them. When people hurt with them. Weep with those that weep. But can I tell you that, in all honesty, through the years, there have been times I found it harder to do the first one. If someone loses a father, a mother, a child, they lose a job, I can always be touched by that. But maybe the good thing that happened in somebody's life was something I was wanting to happen in my life. I have 2 children and they're 7 years apart. We planned it to be much closer together. But we were not able to have a child for a time. And during that time, my wife lost one baby. When you're wanting to have a child and it's not happening, and somebody comes in, now, we're going to have a baby. Sometimes it's hard to be as happy for them as you should be. You're wanting a new job. Your job's not getting it. Maybe you're completely out of work. One of your brothers says, I got hired by this company, and they're going to pay me this. You put a fake smile on and say, that's great. And inside you're going, wish that had been me, I know it's hard. I've been there. I failed at it a few times. But I need to love my brothers and sisters so much that I always can rejoice with them, as long as it's a good thing, and not be thinking, well, what about me? Rejoice with those that rejoice, and don't assume the worst about people. Look at 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 7. Great chapter on love. Especially I come over Here, I wish I had the gift of tongues, and I could speak Shauna and Indabelli and speak British English and, other things. I wish I had that gift. But Paul told these people, love is better than these miraculous gifts. For one thing, you don't have control over what gift you got, or if you got a gift. You have control over whether or not you love. But he says this about love in verse 7. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. When it says believes all things, he's not talking about being gullible. I think it's the idea of believes the best about people. There are people that, they walk in and you say, well, you look really nice today. What they think is, oh, you mean I didn't look nice last week? You know people who are like that. It doesn't matter what you say, they're able to put a bad spin on it. Don't be that person. Even when it comes across a little short, try to believe the best and be long-suffering. Look at Ephesians again. It was in our reading a little earlier. If you're going to have this unity, verse 2, you're going to have to be long-suffering, patient with people. You're going to have to bear with them sometimes. People can be a little prickly. But we've got to be understanding of people. And we've got to be forgiving of people. Colossians 3. In this text, you remember he talks about putting off the old man, putting on the new man. And he describes different qualities of the old man that would be put away, the anger and the wrath and the filthy language, the immorality. And then you put on the new man. Verse 12, that's kind and humble. It has meekness or gentleness. It has long suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so you also must do. But above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. So many things he says here that are important to us. Long suffering. Having not that we're tolerating sin, but we don't require people to say and do things exactly the way we would want them. And we give a little grace when somebody's not having their best day and seems a little bit grumpy. It happens. Be kind. And when somebody apologizes, certainly we need to be forgiving. But in my years upon this earth, I have seen situations where someone, and I believe in all sincerity, acknowledged they were wrong, asked for forgiveness, and yet you could tell grudges were being held. The people were not willing to forgive. That cannot be us. Our Lord forgave a lot more of us than he's asking us to forgive in others. Hereby we know love because he laid down his life for us. Don't be the person that stirs up trouble. Proverbs, the 6th chapter. Verse 16 says, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him. If you had never read any further, never been through Proverbs in your life, and you came across something that said, there are 6, yes, 7 things the Lord just absolutely hates. And somebody said, now, what do you think those would be? I'm pretty sure most of us would have put on there the hands that shed innocent blood. We'd have figured that would be something God hated. Would we have started the list with a proud look. Some of your translations say haughty eyes. Kind of thinking of ourselves better than others. That's what starts the list. But look at the last one. One who sows discord among brethren. Too often churches have been troubled by that person that just loves to stir things up. They're always going, did you hear about so-and-so? And they can complain about how the songs were led, how the prayer was done, how the talk was done at the Lord's Supper. They just find one thing after another to complain about. They try to stir things up. In Romans, the 14th chapter, when in this context, Paul's dealing with some differences, primarily between Jew and Gentile Christians. He makes this statement, verse 19. Therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace, and the things by which one may edify another. I've been a part of worship assemblies where, just to be brutally honest, the singing was terrible. You know, there was a man leading singing that didn't know what he was doing. It happens. I'll tell you what, I've been a part of a whole lot of services where the preaching wasn't too good. Should have been better. Those kind of things happen. But why do I want to whisper and complain about it? I sure don't try to stir up trouble about the preaching. Don't look for that. Titus 3 in verses 10 and 11. He said, if there is a divisive man, you admonish him. And after a first and second admonition, reject him. Sometimes churches, if they've got a fornicator in their midst, they recognize we got to do something about this. But a man or a woman, it can be either one, they're constantly stirring little things, causing little squabbles, stirring up unrest, and we just kind of hope it'll go away. It needs to be dealt with. Well, you've been a good audience and listened patiently. I'm going to wrap it up with one last one that's really important. Look at Galatians, the 6th chapter, in verse 1. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. I wish this were never required of Christians. That we never had brothers or sisters that would be overtaken in sin. But it happens. I suspect if you could go out and find all the erring who've left the faith here, this building would be a lot fuller. I know they're where I am. If we could somehow bring back to the Lord all who have strayed away, we would have to build a new building. It wouldn't hold them all. Christians fall away. And sometimes they cannot be restored despite our loving efforts. They have a choice they have to make. But I need the Spirit of Jesus who would say, man, the shepherd sees his sheep lost, Matthew 18. He leaves that sheep, the 99, he goes after that lost sheep. James, the 5th chapter, in verse 19. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the error of his way will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. When we see people, our brothers and sisters, turn into a way that will lead them to death, to spiritual death, we need to do all within our power to restore them. Sometimes that goes as far as he mentions in 2 Thessalonians 3 and 1 Corinthians 5. We may end up having to withdraw from them. But we do all we can to bring them back. Why? Well, God expects it of us. But we love them. We're going to tell them the truth, point out the danger they're in, because we love them. If they remain lost, it will not be because we didn't care. We will do all we can. When you see it happen, earlier it was said in the previous class, nip it in the bud. If you begin to see signs of slippage, of somebody losing interest, the fire beginning to fade, try to go to them then. Try to restore the area. And can I, just along this line, say to you that with those who teach classes, when those who preach say things that seem to be of a rebuke, that, it felt like he was just preaching right to me. Remember the question Paul asked of the Galatians. Chapter 4, verse 16, he said, have I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? If you want to go to heaven, you want teaching that sometimes challenges you, that sometimes says to you, you can do better, you must do better. That's what we want. Let's turn to John the 17th chapter. Verse 20 and 21. We will let this wrap us up. After I've read this, I'll go back to my place. But I want to thank you for allowing me this chance. I hope these words have been helpful to you. And I pray that God will bless you in all that you do that is right in His sight. Verse 20. I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. Love one another.